Hey there, everyone. Been a while since I've been on here podcasting, but I have a very special person here with me today. I've got Hannah Blosser, who is my sometimes have you even had me live before ever?
Not live, just recorded, but
Okay.
you know.
Yes. Well, she's my student on recording, I guess.
Yes.
You're going to have me live this semester, though.
hmm
But I'm over at the Blosser home. Dr. Blosser is over on the couch eating salad, and we're going to do a podcast. What are we talking about today?
Today we're going to be talking about music and its various qualities and attributes.
Yes, because we are both music lovers.
Yes.
And when I got the idea to ask you to do this, I was like thinking, oh, music would be great to talk about with Hannah. I think you had the same idea, didn't you?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah. I thought it would be interesting if we both talked about our like exposure to music as young people. Because I think probably we both had very different exposures to music, and I'm just curious how you came to be introduced to it and love it, and then I'll talk about my exposure to it, and then
Okay.
yeah. So how did you get exposed to music?
I think just from a very early age, my dad is a great classical music lover, and so I would listen to it every night when I go to bed. I still do. I have it on my CD player, and I've listened to Bach, Allegri, all of these different classical composers. And I didn't really pay attention to it when I was little, because, when you're a little kid, it's like, it's just in the background, doesn't really matter. And my dad would listen to opera, and I would, make fun of it. So I'd be going around the house like, whoa! And I didn't appreciate it at all. So I kind of grew into it eventually, and I heard pop music growing up. I was an early 2000s kid, so, One Direction and
Yeah,
all those
yeah.
guys. But, so that was kind of the first exposure I had.
So your exposure was very high cultured music, like the best that Western civilization had to offer,
Basically, mixed with a little bit of early 2000s pop.
mixed with One Direction.
Yeah, it's One Direction and Taylor Swift were the two others.
Oh, that is that is so interesting. Very different from my exposure to music. My father was and is a musician. He was in When I was growing up, he was in various, I guess, blues bands or just classic rock bands.
Yeah.
He was a bass player, and I remember being exposed to music from a very early age, but it was like blues music, or rock. And my dad would sometimes take me and my brother when we were little to his band practices,
Yeah.
where, these people's, I don't know who they were, but and or he'd have band practice in our basement, and I remember how loud it was,
Oh, yeah.
just the drums and the guitars and the house vibrating.
Definitely.
And sometimes I'd go down into the basement, and I remember seeing these I still have these images in my mind of a very smoky room, because everybody was smoking, and they had on the clothes. You can imagine mid '80s clothes. Everybody had big beards,
Yeah.
Cigarettes hanging out of their mouths, and they were playing this blues music, and it was just for a young child. It was just ear pounding,
Definitely.
But I think it exposed me. I grew up around that, so grew up watching my dad play music. It was just something that was done in our household, and I didn't have much of an exposure to classical music at all growing up. I think probably that didn't, well, I mean, maybe I heard it on commercials,
Yeah. I
like
mean,
wedding ring commercials.
Exactly. It's
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I didn't go to church or anything, so I didn't go to but I think probably the first time I was exposed to high cultural music was when I joined the choir in my public high school. And the choir director was like, okay, we're going to sing these, we sung Mozart, Ave Verum Corpus,
Yeah.
and we sung these various pieces, and I was like, oh, this stuff's really beautiful,
Yeah, I think choir had a big impact on me too, because I joined my parish choir when I was 11, so I've been there for 6 going on 7 years now.
Yeah.
And I also, from a young age, we would go to the Latin Mass, and I would hear the chant and all of the beautiful polyphony. It's funny because the choir at the church we first went to in Detroit is run by a director named Wasim Sarway, and he's a phenomenal director. So I've heard his music for forever, and now I'm actually in one of his choirs. So it's really
Very
cool.
lucky.
Yeah, I know. It's kind of continued and grown. So.
There's a certain you that is one thing you and I share in common is we've both been in choir.
Hmm.
Um, and when I was in choir in public high school, you sang a lot of sacred music.
Hmm.
I don't think they do that much anymore. I think they've
No.
mainly show tunes and stuff like
Yeah,
that.
it's lots of show tunes now.
But when I was in high school, you sung a lot of sacred music. Like sometimes our whole Christmas concert would be all sacred music,
Hmm.
with maybe a few like, Jingle Bell Rock sort of songs thrown
Yeah.
in. But it was all very sacred, and the prevalent thought at the time was like if we were to eliminate sacred music from choral performances, we wouldn't have any material left to draw on because there's
Yeah.
so much sacred music.
Hmm.
But and I guess this can segue into our next question I want to talk about. But like the experience of actually like listening to it is one thing,
Hmm.
but then when you're in that choir and you're making the music or you're in that band or whatever, like it's a totally different experience when you're performing the music. And I guess so what does music mean to you? And I guess I mean like playing, and that can count singing, or
Yeah.
playing your instruments, and then also listening.
Yeah. That's a really interesting question because it's true. When you play music, it's very different from just listening to it.
Hmm.
Because you're completely, it's like being in a surround sound room
Yeah.
almost, and you're just immersed in it. And you're not really focusing on what it sounds like. You're focusing on, getting it right if you're
Wait,
playing.
tell us what instruments you play.
Okay, I play saxophone, piano, and ukulele primarily. I've also played recorder in the past. I was in like a little recorder choir when I was little.
Okay.
So yeah, those are the main ones, and then voice, of course.
Right.
So I mostly sing. And it's, you practice the music over and over, especially in choir, and again, you're not really focused on what it sounds like. You're just trying to get it right so that you can move on.
Yeah.
But then when you go to sing it, for instance, I was singing an orchestral mass today with the full orchestra. And it really, music really touches you, not just like physically, but mentally, like, and spiritually. You can feel it. And so you sing something with a full orchestra, or even just if you're playing by yourself in your room, like say you play guitar, like me, ukulele.
Hmm.
And it's like, I don't know, it's a way to express yourself.
Hmm.
So in music, in a singer's voice, you can hear them. Like you can just hear their soul. This is this person singing, and that's what's coming out of them. And so that's what music really means to me, whether playing or listening. Like this is an expression of somebody's heart and soul. And I want to feel that. I want to be part of that. So if I'm sad, I want to sing something sad. If
Yeah.
I'm happy, I sing something crazy,
Right.
like an Irish jig. And, it's just a really great way to kind of get your emotions.
Do you ever have the sense of like when you're in the choir? Now, I don't know if you play music instruments like with a group ever, but primarily in the choir, there's a certain sense of like a transcendent kind of like a unity almost. Like when you got your own voice, and then you're united with like all these other people. They're doing their parts.
Mhm.
Everybody's doing their own individual part, but they all fit together, and this thing emerges that is like bigger than any one person's part.
Yeah.
And do you ever get this strong sense of that, of like this kind of transcendent aspect to the music that that is especially like in a choir when all the voices are just hitting just right?
Yeah, definitely. There's one time specifically that's happened to me. It was in the very small choir I sing with on First Fridays. There were only like 8 voices, so 2 per part, and we were singing Franz Biebel's Ave Maria, which
Mhm.
is a very beautiful piece. If you haven't heard it, highly recommend listening to it.
Mm.
And we do pretty much all of our music a cappella, so it's just the human voice. And I've never noticed or realized that the human voice can sound this beautiful.
Mm.
Because we're sitting there singing, and the music, the Ave Maria, it like builds and keeps building and
Yes,
building until you
yeah.
reach this like climax. And like each part just interwove, and like the harmonies were just like slightly dissonant, but they just combined
Yeah.
perfectly. And it like just totally elevated everyone. And afterwards, the priest who was celebrating mass, he was like, I was standing at the altar and I was just like, this sounds like angels singing. And I said, yeah, it did, even up there for us.
There's really nothing like that. Like
Yeah.
I think it's a totally unique human experience.
It
I
is.
can't think of any other comparable moment like that
Mm-hmm.
in human activity. I remember when I was in high school, we our choir in Howell High School was one of the better choirs in the
Oh.
state
Mm-hmm.
because we had a phenomenal director, Doctor. No, he's not a doctor. Was he? I don't know. Mr. Rod Bushy,
Mm-hmm.
who now he's the sort of he has an auditorium named after him now.
Oh
You know,
wow.
he's one of those sorts of fellows.
Yeah.
You know, multiple awards. You know, all this stuff, and
Mm-hmm.
he knew how to like bring it out of you. You know,
Nice.
and so because we were like a very accomplished choir, we would go on a tour. Like we'd get in a bus and he'd take us
Fancy.
around every year. You know, we'd go somewhere, we'd go to a city, and we'd sing multiple venues. You
Mm-hmm.
know, so I remember we went to Pittsburgh to sing all these different venues, and sometimes we'd sing for audiences, and sometimes we'd sing like for other choir director. Like he'd go down and do these things where like other like public school choir directors would come in, and then they'd be like, okay, pay attention to this Bushy guy. This is the way you do it. And then like he'd show us off, you know.
Nice.
So we were going down to Pittsburgh in the back of this bus, and like we're all high schoolers, so we're all crazy, you know. And Mr. Bushy was like not happy with the level of chaos going on the
Mm-hmm.
on the bus. And so he comes to the back of the bus and he's like, "All right, we're going to rehearse one of our pieces." And we're just like, "Okay." So he's standing up in the middle of the bus and I wish I could remember the name. We were singing this German piece.
Hmm.
I think it was called I think it was called Hosanna dem Sohne Davids,
Mm-hmm.
Hosanna to the Son of David.
Yeah.
It was a late medieval piece that was all in German, you
Wow.
know, beautiful.
Yeah.
And he just would kind of go like this. Those of you who are listening, I'm doing the choir thing with my fingers to bring
It's
silence.
like the okay finger,
Yes,
but
yes.
not.
The thing the choir director does when he wants you to shut up,
Yeah.
you know?
Exactly.
And then he started directing us, and it was like, it's amazing. Like 2 minutes earlier, we were like all these like crazy teenagers just being insane,
Mm-hmm.
and then he just brought us to the point, and then started the music, and all those beautiful harmonies started emerging right in the back of the bus, and we just did the whole piece,
Wow.
and it was beautiful. It's
That's
like
amazing.
it's a wonderful memory, and it's just it kind of testifies to the power of music to bring harmony, you
Yeah.
know, among disparate people because it requires a phenomenal degree of not just coordination but cooperation,
Mm-hmm.
you know. So for me, and I'm curious if you find this too, music, whether playing or listening, in addition to everything you said, there seems to be like almost like a therapeutic value to it,
Mm-hmm.
like it heals you in a way.
Yeah, it definitely does. Like, for instance, my therapy, quote unquote, that I do often, my dad noticed this too. He's like, whenever you're feeling something, I can tell you're upset or something, you go and play the piano. I'm like, I never really realized that about myself, but that's what I do. I go play piano because it's just, I can do something with my hands, but I'm also like hearing something that just helps me work through whatever I'm feeling.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it has some sort of value where well I think probably because you described it as a self-expression,
Mm-hmm.
you know, which it certainly is, and that helps you to just kind of work through whatever you're going through, I guess.
Yeah.
Get it out or put some form to it.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you think people are universally drawn to it? Like, um, well, I guess it seems like people are universally drawn to music. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I've never met someone where I'm like, "Hey, you like music?" "No, I hate it." You know, like,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like, you'll have people who who don't like a particular style of music,
Definitely.
or they're like, "I'm not a musician,"
Mm-hmm.
but like everybody has their music that they like.
Yeah.
And I guess what is it do you think that speaks to the human experience?
It's another interesting question that I've never actually thought about, but I mean, it's true though. Like everybody, no matter who they are, where they come from, they listen to some kind of music, even if you personally don't think of it as like a music form. So like personally, I listen to classical mostly. Like that's
Mm-hmm.
my favorite. And one of the things I don't listen to is rap. Like I hate rap.
Yeah.
And so other people though, that's what they like and that's what they're drawn to. And I
There's
guess
people who listen to K-pop.
yes, there are.
I've heard of it.
Yeah, me too. I don't know if I've like encountered a K-pop person, but
Oh, they're
I've
out
heard
there.
of them. Yeah.
Yeah.
They can be vicious.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I guess again it kind of ties into the self-expression. Like they find something they relate to,
Mhm.
maybe in whatever they're listening to, and I guess that just attracts them, whether subconsciously or like they know that it does. And
Do you think
Yeah.
it's a do you think there's an aspect in which music is a self-expression in which it's a stand-in for when we can't verbalize what we're feeling?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, there's some music pieces I've heard where like I kind of have a sense of what it's expressing and I feel something. I can't tell
Hmm.
what it is. I'm like the music says it. Like this is what I'm feeling, but I can't tell you what it is. That happened to me actually. There was something I was going through and I was trying to express it to my dad and I was like, listen to this song. Like this is what I'm feeling right now. I can't tell you. My dad's asleep right now. Like no, he's awake now. Anyway, but I was like, I can't tell you what I'm feeling, but listen to this song,
Yeah.
and that's what I'm trying to express right now.
Yeah, it has a way of like because music has so many facets to it. You've got the words, right?
Mhm.
And then the instrumentation, like the actual physical sound of it, and then the melody,
Mhm.
and the rhythm, the tempo.
Yeah.
All these different things give a very complex expression, maybe more so than we could verbalize. Um, I've done the same thing where I've picked songs and been like this. Oh, this kind of day I'm feeling.
Mhm.
Now I don't mean to deny that like the music has an objective, meaning or
Yeah.
content.
Mhm.
The songwriter obviously meant something
Mhm.
when they wrote it, but I've noticed, and maybe you do this. I mean, you probably do. I think most people do.
Mhm.
People will take music and they will appropriate their own meaning to it
Mhm.
outside of what the. I mean, do
Yeah.
you ever do that?
Yeah, I've done it myself without meaning to, and then later like look back and I'm like, oh, that's not what that writer really meant to do, but this is how I take it. And I've seen other people do it, like my friends too. They're like, oh, this song, I know the lyrics don't mean this, but to me, this is what it means.
Yeah, yeah.
And yeah, I'm like, well,
It speaks to
anyway,
you in some place.
yeah, just something, even if it's just one lyric in there, and you hear it, and you're like, oh wow, I really like that resonates with me.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Like I learned kind of early on, like if I don't know what the song means, but I
Hmm.
like it, I don't look up what it means because
Yeah.
oftentimes the real meaning is like worse than what, or
Hmm.
not worse, but it's just more like banal than like there was this song I really loved by Radiohead. It was
Hmm.
probably my favorite song ever called Let Down.
Hmm.
And it seemed like it was so profound and it had so much meaning and everything was like very meaningful. And
Hmm.
I didn't understand what it was about. It was very veiled and symbolic imagery. And so one day I read an interview with the songwriter Tom York about what the song was about, and he
Hmm.
was like, "Oh, I was drinking at the bar and I was imagining how funny it would be if everybody's chairs were glued to the ceiling." And that was like what prompted the song.
Oh my goodness.
And I was like, "What?"
It's
But
like,
like to
that's
me it
got
was like
ruined.
I know to me I was like listening to this song with all this like intense teenage angst and I was like
Hmm.
making it very meaningful and I was like, okay, I'm not going to look up what the songs are about anymore. I
Yeah.
just, I mean, if you sometimes you can just tell what it's about. But
Hmm.
I think it's very interesting that people are so like they want it to have such a personal meaning that they will appropriate some meaning for
Yeah.
it. There's a very famous song by by Soundgarden, so the '90s band,
Hmm.
Black Hole Sun, where is one of the more famous songs of the '90s. You might not be familiar with it, but um, it was another song that was very symbolic, had lots of symbolic language, and the writer Chris Cornell famously said that it meant nothing. He said that like he couldn't come up with lyrics for it,
Hmm.
and he was writing like placeholder lyrics that were just like nonsense
Yeah.
lyrics, which I do that when I write songs sometimes. I want
Hmm.
to figure out like how many syllables
Hmm.
will fit in a line or what, and so you write like a nonsense lyric.
Yeah.
And he did that, and the nonsense lyrics he just kept them.
Oh,
And he
really?
said it has no meaning,
Oh my
but
goodness.
it became their most famous song. Like when he
Wow.
died, it was like tributes were played to the song,
Nice.
because people had found in it whatever meaning they need to
Hmm.
find. And I think that's
Yeah.
just such an interesting aspect of it. But um, but to kind of go on to another question, there's a lot of discussion about the effect that music can have on us, mentally or emotionally or spiritually. Because we've been talking about as an expression,
Yeah.
something kind of like coming out of us. Does it go the other way too, do you think?
I think it can, and because depending on what you listen to, it can really affect, I found personally, and like with people I know, it can affect your mental state.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I've often found, if people are listening to something like darker and heavier, like metal or even like certain types of heavier rock, they're often, not always, but often like not maybe in a good mental place or just in kind of like the dumps maybe. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I have people say down in the dumps.
Does it put them in the dumps, or they're already in the dumps and so they want to listen to it?
They're probably already in the dumps, but I think it doesn't help them to listen to something really heavy or like fast paced or dark. And personally, I've found, if I'm having a good day and then I put on a sad song or something, I just go, oh wow, now I don't feel so great.
But you said earlier you tend to like if you're sad, you want to hear sad music. If
Yeah.
you're happy, so like, and that makes sense. But like, you're saying like there's a certain point in which it maybe like not just expresses but reinforces like
Yeah.
the like there's memes about the sad song where it's like I'm sad, so I want to listen to this song that's gonna hit me right in
Yeah.
this spot. Even worse, oh, I'm gonna listen to it again. Like
Get the feels.
yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I think if you like over listen to something, or even like I said, if you're not feeling sad and you're listening to your Spotify playlist and then suddenly that one sad song on your playlist comes on, you're just like, oh darn, now I'm remembering all the dumb things I've done. I feel really crappy now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we attach certain emotions to that, like especially if we have a personal history with
Mm-hmm.
a song.
Yeah. Definitely.
But I was in the military once, and when they were trying to get us like hyped up to go to war,
Mm-hmm.
and I never went to the war, but they were trying to get us like hyped up to go to the war, so they'd take us in this room, and they'd play this video. There's this really obnoxious song. Maybe you know it. I hope you don't. But like, it's like was it like "Let the Bodies Hit the Floor"? Or, that where it's just like "Let the bodies hit the floor, let the bodies hit the floor." It's just like this heavy song, and
Yeah.
just keeps saying that. And they would put that song, and it's like "Let the bodies hit the floor," and then it'd just be this montage of things being blown up and like missiles hitting things, explosions, and it was just like it's like, yeah, they weren't playing Bach to get us riled up to go to
No.
war. They were playing something that was like
Yeah.
it, like clearly with the understand that this would have an effect on our psyche, that we'd be like, oh yeah, like we'll go blow something up.
Definitely. Yeah. And I've seen that among some of my guy friends for sure. They're like, yeah, I'm gonna go listen to some Sabaton.
Yeah, some Sabaton, man.
My brother is that way though. He's like, I'm gonna go lift and listen to Sabaton. I'm like, do that.
Imagine he's a Polish hussar relieving Vienna.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But yeah, it definitely does have some kind of effect on our mentality, even if we don't notice it. Like,
Yeah.
certain songs will make us angry or like revved up to do something. And
Mhm.
I know sometimes if I listen to music, I'll feel super motivated suddenly. And I'm like, I don't know why, but now I'm gonna go clean my room and like all the rest of the house.
Yeah. And then people will say there's a certain type of songs where they'll say like this is a driving song, like this is a road trip song.
Yeah.
Or there's a whole genre of music that's like, oh, you listen to this if you're trying to fall asleep.
Yeah.
Like
It's interesting.
or like what they used to call elevator music, or the
Yeah.
stuff that's just like just kind of like background.
Like,
Yeah. So it seems very clear that from our human experience, everybody admits that music has an effect in putting us in certain moods.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know, it's a big question whether that is because the objective structure of the music has a physiological effect, or if it's more conditioned, like we're conditioned to think of this type of music as meaning these certain things. And so, like, for example, in the West, we think of a minor key as being sad,
Yeah.
but that's not the case everywhere,
Yeah.
right? I listen to a lot of weird, like, sometimes I go on and I listen to, like, there's certain artists who will recreate, like, ancient Babylonian music or
Yeah.
Egyptian music, where they're playing this weird thing and they're like, and it's like,
Yeah.
To a Western ear, it sounds completely like exotic.
Yeah.
But when you read the lyrics, it'll often be like some song of joy, or so like, is it that something like the minor key makes us sad, or do we just associate that with sadness because in our culture it's just developed that way?
Yeah.
That's a question I don't know.
That's a really interesting question because I've heard, stuff like I've heard Mozart, for instance, has like a really great impact on the brain, and like if you're
Yeah.
studying, it's good to listen to Mozart because for some reason it makes you want to study more,
Hmm.
or it just helps you concentrate or something. But yeah, that's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I don't know, but like opera
Mm-hmm.
used to be very controversial.
Really?
Did you ever hear this? So
Maybe. Not sure.
so opera was once banned in the Papal States
Hmm.
by the popes personally because like everything that like people say about rock and roll, like it's bad influence, whatever,
Mm-hmm.
they used to say that about opera
Hmm.
because when opera first started, these operatic performances were very like rowdy.
Yeah.
People would be drunk. There'd be like they're very debauched.
Mm-hmm.
It was like very and the popes were like these things are bad for morals, and they banned opera music.
That's so
In the
interesting.
Papal States.
Yeah.
Now, in that culture or in that milieu,
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if you heard opera, if it would be like when we hear metal or so, like
Yeah.
oh more break stuff,
I know, yeah. That's interesting to think about. 'Cause, today, like, opera is associated with, like,
very
all
high
these,
culture.
like, very, like, hoity-toity type people.
Yeah,
And they listen to their, like, Cecilia Bartoli and their Pavarotti,
yeah.
And, but back then,
Well, what
yeah.
happened is the operas used to explore social and political themes that you
Mhm.
couldn't speak about openly.
Yeah.
You couldn't speak about various things because of the way it was back then. So
Mhm.
they would have veiled political messages,
Yeah.
or they would have sexual innuendos, or,
Mm.
or things that you couldn't just publish in a book.
Yeah.
And then it would like rile up people's blood,
Mhm.
and it would lead sometimes there'd be a fight or some or a riot
Yeah.
or whatever. And so, but yeah, so I mean, I know I used to be a youth director, and I used to encounter there'd be homeschool parents who were well intentioned, but I think mistaken on this point, where they'd be like, well, we believe that certain drum beats are evil. You know, I said, like, if you have a syncopated
Mhm.
drum beat, which for the way they understood it was a basic 4/4 drum beat, like on.
Yeah.
They said
Mhm.
that was I had several people who said to me that that was like an intrinsically disordered beat,
Hmm.
and that and the argument was that this beat that it now I was gonna say I don't believe this,
Yeah.
but the argument was that this beat channeled, and I'm doing air quotes,
Yeah.
it channeled like energy
Mm.
into your pelvic area and made you want to move in lewd ways.
What the heck?
You
Makes
know,
no sense.
um,
But okay.
and they basically would go back to like, well, if you look at like these like African tribal dances,
Mhm.
or like these various sorts of hip hop, like it's all centered around like dancing in these certain ways that are considered lewd.
Yeah.
And so, in my opinion, now, I mean, theologically, there's only so many ways you can make music. You can blow air across a hole,
Mhm.
you can hit something,
Mhm.
you can pluck something.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine that if I go like that's from God, but if I go that it's like from the devil,
I know,
you know what I
yeah.
mean? But
Mhm.
I think what they fundamentally did was confuse the cause and the effect.
Yeah.
Like they looked at these things and said like, well, this is causing this like suggestive dancing. But really what happens is that like, and I'd be curious on your opinion on this,
Mhm.
the human brain is very good at recognizing patterns.
Mhm.
Like that's how human knowledge is even possible,
Mhm.
is our brain is like a pattern recognition, machine. And a rhythm is basically like a pattern in sound,
Mhm.
right? It's where your brain recognizes like, oh,
Yeah.
I hear this.
Mhm.
And because we recognize patterns, and because we're naturally coordinated species, like I think when we hear the pattern,
Mhm.
it makes it easier for us to synchronize our movements
Yeah.
with the pattern. And so we want to do that
Mhm.
because, let's be honest, it's fun.
Yeah.
Like dancing is fun.
Mhm.
So I don't know, but I do not believe that those beats cause that. But I
No.
think that we want to have certain movements and certain dances, and then we hear like a very strong driving beat,
Mhm.
where like, oh, this makes it easier. And then there's certain beats that are more complex,
Yeah.
where you get like a waltz, where you're kind of like, oh, I see what it is, and then you
Yeah.
move according to that.
Mhm.
Oh, what do you think about all that?
Yeah. It's interesting because I have heard, there's people who say, certain types of music, it like affects you subconsciously and like
Yeah.
it might lead you spiritually down the wrong track.
Yeah.
And I think there are definitely some types of music that are very obscure, very uncommon, that probably there's something to it because maybe the lyrics are, they might be satanic or something.
Sure.
But just the rhythms themselves.
But not by channeling some like mystic energy to
No.
certain body parts that are going to make them shake.
No, because
Yeah.
like if you're gonna dance, you're gonna dance. Like it's just
Yeah.
it's not. It doesn't depend on the rhythm of the music. It's you who are the one controlling that movement.
Yeah.
Like you said, if you're gonna waltz, you hear a 3-beat. If you know how to waltz, you're like, oh sweet, I can waltz to this. Or if you hear a 4-beat, if you're a ballroom dancer, I can rumba to this.
Yeah, or you hear something that's like,
Yeah.
you're like, I can swing to this.
Exactly.
You know?
Yeah. You got like a nice East Coast swing going there. Or if
Yeah.
you hear like a country song, great West Coast swing.
Yep.
But yeah, it's not the rhythm that's controlling you. It's just your brain recognizing that and saying, "Oh, sweet, I can do this with that movement, and it works fantastic."
Yeah.
Yeah, and like tap dancers, they hear something like I tap dance, and I hear something like, "Sweet, I can tap to this." Like I got a nice rhythm going here,
Yeah.
and yeah, because we need those rhythms to create music, to recognize music,
Yeah.
and my primary genre I like to play around with music is Celtic folk,
Oh,
and
yeah.
you really need rhythm for that.
Yeah, you do.
Because each type is different. So like a jig, you got like a 6-beat, 1 2 3 4 5 6 1 2 3 4 5 6, and like an air, it's a slow 4-beat, like Danny Boy, the classic air.
What's the ones that are like doom chicka doom chicka doom chicka doom chicka doom chicka doom chicka doom?
That'd be like a real 1 2 3 4 1 2
Yeah,
3
yeah, yeah,
4. Yeah, and then you clap on the offbeat.
Right.
Yeah, and so
Yeah.
you got this nice reel going. And so yeah, we pick up patterns and we recognize them, and that's crucial to human development and recognition.
Yeah, it is. And I think it's one of the coolest things about music. Like if
Yeah.
you're a musician, you hear that stuff like everywhere.
Yeah, it's true.
You know, my kids get annoyed because like I'll turn the like when I'm in the car, the turnstiles, and I was like, and then like
Yeah.
while the turnstile's going, I start going, like making a beat off it. They're
Yeah.
like, "Jeez."
Exactly. Like I'll hear music now because I just recently learned like the different patterns for Irish music, and I'll be like, "This is a real 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4." My dad's like, "It's a what?"
So do you think that like does a person's choice in music tell you something about them? Like if I show you my playlist and you go through it and you're like, oh, like does that give you some insight into the person?
I think to a point, it depends on the person because we're all very different and our music tastes can vary incredibly. Like if you looked at my playlist, you'd be like, "What the heck is this?" Because it's everything. Because
Yeah.
I listen to everything. But I think certain people you definitely can tell by just what they listen to regularly. You know, like I listen to classical mostly, so people are probably gonna be like, "Okay, you're a classically trained musician most likely," and you probably like reading books and studying and that kind of thing.
Nerd.
Exactly. It's like, you listen to classical, you're a nerd. I'm like, thank you. But, and if generally, personally, like if somebody listens, I think, okay, this does depend on how you're brought up, like with your music education.
Yeah.
But like if I hear that somebody's listening to heavy metal or rap, I generally think, okay, that person's probably, especially
This
if
is
they're,
degenerate.
I
No,
know.
I'm just-
Yeah. Especially if they're a teenager, I'm like, all right, you're developing, you're growing, you're going through a lot of angst. And this is what you're listening to. Okay, I understand that. But it's
But
not
what-
my taste.
but-
But
Yeah, but what if I feel that way when I see like that you listen to the Newsies soundtrack or something? I'm like,
I
oh,
do.
okay, you're going through a phase. Like,
Yeah, that's how my dad thinks. He's like, okay, it's okay. But I guess, I don't know.
well, let's put it this way: the music can tell you their music can tell you something about where they're at and what their interests in, but it's not really a criteria of judgment on their character.
Yeah, because I think, like we said earlier, people draw different meanings from different types of music.
Yeah.
And so just because they listen to one type of music doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to draw what you draw out of it. And, so, out of Newsies, I get, like, excitement and feels, and
Yeah.
I love it. And other people, like my dad, are just like, what is this noise? So, we're all different.
My friend Louis got me into listening to Mongolian throat singing.
Oh, no.
Have you ever
You're
heard
one of those, yes.
I mean, I'm not an aficionado of it by any
Yeah.
means, but I kind of like have started listening to it in the background here and there, and I'm kind of like, this is kind of cool.
It's okay. It's kind of cool, like from I'm gonna sidetrack into vocal anatomy because
Yeah.
I love anything related to vocal stuff. Sorry, I just noticed my cat's like creeping up on my dad. He might do some Mongolian throat singing for us. But anyway, so like I know this couple, well, they're getting married this year, but boyfriend and girlfriend, and they're both musicians, and they were talking about how one of their teachers taught them Mongolian throat singing.
Wow.
And like that's impressive. It's weird, but okay.
From a biological standpoint, like it uses such a deep
Yeah.
register.
I don't know how you could get down there. Like
It's
I don't
basically
know.
like singing out of your like I don't know,
It's below your diaphragm. It's like down your gut. Like just
like when choir directors say like sing from your gut, like
yeah,
this is like literally.
literally, and then just like no recognizable sound at first, just kind of like a ugh.
Yeah, it's just like.
Yeah. Exactly.
But yeah, if you open my playlist and it was like all Mongolian throat singing, which it's not. I mean, yeah, I mean that might be like okay, that's weird.
I think
You know,
you're a nerd. A really nerdy nerd.
really, yeah. I think in terms of like I've learned over time to, and this is something that's maybe not as big a deal for your generation because you guys are very eclectic
Hmm.
in your music because you have a music distribution system through streaming services where you literally pick and choose specific songs that you want and you're all over the map with it.
Yeah.
You're not like committed to a style or to a group
Hmm.
of artists. But I had to learn to distinguish between like the music itself and maybe like a social message that was mixed up with the music, you
Hmm.
know? So like you take something like the musical revolution that happened in the late 60s,
Hmm.
like the Woodstock era,
Yeah.
where that sort of music was very much attached to a specific sort of social political message about culture,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
And if you were a fan of that music back then, it would be safe to assume that you affirmed the principles that that sort of movement stood for, right?
Hmm.
But then what's interesting is over time, and I think a lot of good music emerges in a like social context like that.
Yeah.
But then over time, like it gets like abstracted from that,
Hmm.
you know? Like if you're listening to Jimi Hendrix back in 1969,
Hmm.
you know, that means one thing.
Yeah.
If you're like a 58, 65-year-old boomer sitting in the office, like listening to a Jimi Hendrix mix on
Hmm.
your headset while you're working on an Excel spreadsheet,
Hmm.
like that's very abstracted from its original context,
Yeah.
and it doesn't have, in my opinion, it doesn't have all that baggage anymore.
Hmm.
It's kind of like the song is kind of like emerged and like dusted all that stuff off, and now it's just kind of like a more
Yeah.
independent thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. It's kind of almost like a lot of people, especially now, the boomer generation, they go back to that kind of thing for nostalgia a
Yeah.
lot. And like I know a lot of people kind of around my dad's age range, they love ABBA is one of the things. They just love it. And my dad's really funny. I keep mentioning him because, he was the first kind of
Yeah.
music influence in my life. But he hates ABBA because for him, that generation of music meant something very different. And he just didn't appreciate it, I guess. And so a lot
Right.
of
So when
people,
he hears that, he
Mhm.
he goes back to that.
yeah, he has like that bad memory, while other people his age would have like a better, like, I don't know,
Interesting.
just reminiscing about that era.
Why do you think people universally seem nostalgic about the music they grew up with? Where they're
Yeah.
like, they might be into other music, but the
Hmm.
music they grew up with is like very special to them. What do
Yeah.
you think is behind that?
I guess it's just, like I just said, kind of like memories associated with it. I don't know. So, if you're driving in the car and you hear like,
But that could happen anytime. Like
I
I make
guess
memories
so.
when I'm like 50 with music, but
Yeah.
why are these
I guess
special?
because when you're a child, that's like your time of greatest innocence, and like it's very carefree. And so when you get older, you still make memories, but they're not as just like fun, carefree, innocent times.
They're not as formative.
Yeah, they're
Yeah.
not quite as formative. And so, I guess I hear old Taylor Swift songs, old One Direction songs. I'm like, man, this reminds me of, like driving in the car with my mom and like listening to all these things that like I never listened to at home, but yeah. And I don't know. It just kind of makes you happy, I guess, to listen to those.
Yeah, I think it has something to do with, like you said, the formation of like as you're forming as a person, you know, there's nothing like youth. Again, you know, it's like a time when you're transitioning.
Yeah.
You're becoming your own person. And then you associate these songs with these certain memories from youth or these certain feelings that you're never going to have again, you know? And they're just very wrapped up with that, you know, and you'd be like, oh, I remember this song when this person dumped me, you know, or whatever, you know.
Exactly.
And that's just like you're always going to remember that. It's like a very formative experience. I've often wondered, like, one thing I miss about music, like, so music has changed a lot. And I mean, I don't mean like the content, but I mean especially the way it's delivered through like streaming services and whatnot.
Yeah.
One thing I really miss about music, and I don't know if you have an experience like this. If you do, I'd like to hear it. But like when I was young, and for anyone prior to, you know, the streaming generation, music always had a very social aspect to it because like we could not go online and listen to it, right? You had to go buy an album or you had to listen to it on the radio.
Yeah.
And so if I'm living in a certain city, there's maybe 2 or 3 radio stations. And all the radio stations are pretty much playing the same music, so they're competing with each other.
Yeah.
So that means all your friends are listening to the same music, you know? So there's a social aspect to the music where it's not like, oh, I have my own eclectic playlist that's everything from show tunes to classic rock to Frank Sinatra to, it's like, it's kind of like everybody has a narrower range of what they're listening to because it's exclusively tied to what's being funneled through the distribution channel of the radio. But that also gives it more of a social aspect because we all know the same songs, you know? And so, you know, I remember things like, you know, like driving to the beach with friends in high school and like, you know, we'd drive there and like roll our windows down and turn the radios up, you know, and everybody knew the songs. And there was like this social component to it where it was like it was only delivered through, you know, social channels, you know, and then it also kind of made you cohesive, like you all liked the same music. And then sometimes there'd be sub things within that where it's like, okay, me and these 3 other guys, we particularly like this band, and these guys like that band, you know, and but it seems like that sort of thing is gone by the wayside, like because now if I want to hear a certain song, I just go look it up and I just listen to it, you know, and I don't rely on any distribution network to give it to me. I don't rely on any social context. I mean, you only heard about new music through your friends, and it was very personal because they'd have to make you a mixtape, or they'd have to like, you know, I remember, sorry to be waxing nostalgic here, but
music is making you nostalgic.
Yeah, and it is my podcast, so.
Yeah.
But like I remember there was a couple of us musical guys who really liked this one band. It was Radiohead, I remember, and they came out with a new album, and one of them called us up and said, "You guys want to come over and listen to the album?" And like that's what we do. We'd go to their house and like you put on the speakers and we sit there and listen to the album.
Yeah.
Or like I remember one time putting like the new Foo Fighters album came out and we're like, let's go for a drive, and like we put the album in, the CD in, we drove around all like, you know, for an hour just at night, 4 of us in the car, just like listening to the Foo Fighters album, and then we'd like comment on each track and be like, that was freaking sweet, you know. And I don't know, like I can tell that now people still listen to music in the car, obviously, but this was like the way that you listen to new music. Your friends giving you an album or saying, "Let come over and let's listen to the album," you know. And it seems like that's not a real, you know, real thing anymore. I like being able to look up any song I want. You know, that's it's because the big downside, you'd be like, you'd hear like the new Foo Fighters song or whatever, and you'd be like, I like that song. And then you buy the whole album, and there'd be like 10 songs you didn't like. And then like you'd have to sort through it to get to the one. So pros and cons, you know.
Definitely. Yeah, and I think I would say my generation's really big. Gen Z is like a huge gap. So I'd say people between like, I'd say from 2000 to like maybe 2009 or 10, or even maybe 11 or 12. Like that very early 2000s, we're kind of like the last people who grew up with like listening to CDs mainly growing up. Like I used to have to buy a CD. Like if I liked a song, like you said, I have to buy the CD to
Yeah.
listen to just that one song. And so there's a lot of songs we all have in common, like with
Mm-hmm.
our childhood. And so you put a bunch of us teenagers, now teenagers, in a van together or something on a trip and put the radio on, and it's like these older, like early 2000s songs, and we all know them. It's hilarious because like we were I was at a college summer program and we were driving somewhere and our counselor put on Party in the USA.
Yeah.
Everybody knew the lyrics and we were just like all of us, the guys and the girls, were just like bopping to it, like singing it.
So that's maybe one way that you still are able to experience that kind of social aspect to it.
Definitely, yeah, because we all have that in common still, and people younger than me don't really have it because they didn't grow up with the CDs like I did, and there is kind of a social aspect in that. Often, if you have like a friend group, you generally will kind of share songs with each other and
Yeah.
kind of gain a similar taste.
Yeah.
So like my best friend and I, we both kind of got into our Broadway phase at the same time.
Yes.
Because we're both singers, we both love Broadway, and so we like share stuff, and so we like the same things.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's cool. And it does seem that but still that's one constant is that music is shared among friend groups, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess like, you know, in earlier ages there was a stronger sense of like our music, you know,
Yeah.
like our generation's music.
Mm-hmm.
And if I were to say like what is the music of like this generation, like I don't know if
Yeah.
there's a bunch of very eclectic individually crafted playlists, you
Mm-hmm.
know. I mean maybe I'm wrong about it,
Yeah.
but it seems like there's not a our music in a generational sense, even
Yeah.
if you have it within your subgroup.
It's true.
But and I definitely want to touch on this point.
Mm-hmm.
You get these people, and I'm definitely not in this camp, but you'll get these people who are like, especially older folks.
Yes. He's asleep.
He's asleep. Okay, yeah. Who are like, there's no good music coming out anymore. What happened to everything today is garbage. Is this a valid critique? Like, why do people say that?
Okay, I have to admit, I guess it's because I've been raised by a boomer. I have said stuff like this before. But that's before I wasn't really into music as much as I am now, like until very recently. Like I didn't have like my YouTube access to listen to music until really recently. And so now like it's broadened and I've been like, oh okay, these are actually okay. But I understand where it's coming from to a point, but also not, because I've heard the music from these people's generations and I'm like, what are you talking about? Our music is better.
Yeah,
I mean, maybe to them it doesn't sound as good, but I'm like, we have better quality for one thing,
yeah,
like better instrumentation. But I don't think that's a completely valid critique because there's definitely some very good musicians out there today
yeah.
who are producing amazing things.
Yeah, like I used to feel that way like when I first grew up, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Part of it was coming back to that like people nostalgizing their own music from when they were kids.
Mm-hmm.
And then you clearly move out of that phase. And then so whatever music is coming out just doesn't have the same effect on you
Yeah.
as when you were young.
Mm-hmm.
But then I started opening up and I started like just listening to new bands, you
Yeah.
know. I just, and sometimes it'd be things people recommended.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it'd be like I'd just be on YouTube and I'd see a video that had like 7 million views and I'd be like, oh, this can't be awful,
Yeah.
you know, what is this? So I'd listen to it and
Mm-hmm.
or like my kids, like my daughter Lucy, she'll send me tracks. She's like, listen to this.
Yeah.
And I mean, I firmly believe there is fantastic music being produced continually.
Mm-hmm.
And now I know that, you know, maybe you could argue that the quality of pop music
Mm-hmm.
has gone down. That maybe
Yeah.
if you went back to 1985 and you're like, okay, Michael Jackson or something,
Mm-hmm.
and then you go to like what is pop music today,
Yeah.
maybe it's not as intricate, maybe
Mhm.
it's more, you know, more processed and manufactured.
Yeah.
But you often see people, especially like making I guess, a traditional Catholic critique, where they boil down all music to pop music,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and they'll make broad statements about music, like music sucks
Yeah.
today, and they really just mean pop music.
Exactly.
Which pop music is like the lowest. That's like the McDonald's of music, you
Yeah.
know. Like you
Yeah.
wouldn't judge cuisine by McDonald's, you know. That's just like a lowest common denominator. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think there's good music being made all the time. There's
Mhm.
always good musicians.
Yeah.
There's always stuff coming out.
Yeah, you may just have to try harder to find them, like dig beneath everything.
Yeah, maybe it's not going to be given to you on a radio station,
Yeah.
but it's there.
Yeah, there's some singers I've heard who deserve to be on the radio. They deserve to be on tour, but they're not. You just like
Yeah.
kind of doing their own thing, and they're very little known, but
Yeah,
you know.
exactly.
Hmm.
I mean, that's my thought. It sounds like you're in agreement.
Yeah.
The last question I wanted to think about is like in our tradition, we're Catholics, and there's a strong association of music with worship in heaven. Like earlier today, we were talking. You said like that the priest said that the music sounded like the angels.
Hmm.
Like we actually don't know what angels sound like.
No. I don't know if I want to know what angels sound like.
But when we hear like beautiful music, we're like, oh, that's angelic,
Yeah.
or I think we all imagine that there's music in heaven,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
and the Bible talks about. Do you know the song King Jesus hath a garden?
I think I've heard
Bum,
it.
bum, 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 bum.
Maybe.
Well, anyhow, it's about it's this beautiful like allegorical song
Hmm.
about Jesus having a garden full of virtues and
Hmm.
about paradise, and the chorus says it's speaking about heaven,
Hmm.
and it says there naught is heard but paradise bird, harp, dulcimer, lute, and
Hmm.
cymbal, trump and timbrel with the tender soothing flute.
Yeah.
It's like the imagery is all music,
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
I'm wondering why do you think we make that association?
It's a really, really good point. Because even, um, like two very famous authors, especially in the Catholic homeschooled circle,
Hmm.
C.S. Lewis and Tolkien,
Hmm.
both of their creation stories, so to speak, start with music.
Right.
So, in Tolkien's world, Iluvatar, he sings the world into being. And in the Chronicles of Narnia, Aslan also sings the world into being.
Right.
And I guess there is a scriptural basis for that, I guess, because, I mean, music is mentioned even starting in Genesis. I just read, I'm doing the Bible in a Year podcast with Mike Schmitz, Father Mike Schmitz, and there was one part, it was going through the genealogy of Noah, I believe.
Hmm.
And one of them, it was like, and he was the first of those who play on the flute or something like that. And I'm like, wow. So
Oh, good
people,
old Jubal King.
yeah,
Yeah.
Jubal.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Jubal.
And I was like, there's music in Genesis.
Yeah.
I'm like, people actually played instruments way back then. And so there must have been something that motivated them. I don't know if, I mean, there were birds, clearly, who sang.
Yeah.
God created birds to sing.
Yeah.
So I don't really know, like, if there's music, so to speak, in heaven, but there's some relation.
Remember the medieval theory about like the harmony of the spheres?
Yeah.
Like about how the planetary spheres are moved by the love of God, and
Mm-hmm.
they make some sort of music,
Yeah.
like that each is like a note,
Mm-hmm.
right? And they make a heavenly music when they
Mm-hmm.
move. There seems to be just a strong association with worship and with heaven.
Yeah.
And you notice that music is the one thing that's, in our worship, the more of it we can get in and the better that we can get in, it's considered more elevated worship,
Yeah.
right?
It's true. And I don't know. It's because, like, going back to the point about how it affects you spiritually or mentally, like in church, you can have a low mass, like a traditional Latin low mass, where there's no music, and it's beautiful. Like the silence is very beautiful. It's
Hmm.
conducive to prayer. But then you even just add chant to that, and there's something that just elevates you even higher. Like
Yeah.
something about it, just the words of the chant and like the sound of it combined kind of elevate the mind to worship God in like a different way,
Yeah.
I guess.
The music is like a conduit
Yeah.
that like plugs you in,
Mm-hmm.
to heaven or something.
Yeah. I guess because when we're singing or when we're listening to something, like we can't help but notice that.
Right.
And so we have something beautiful. It just makes us more, I guess, it's more conducive to like the mind focusing on God.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
G.K. Chesterton hypothesized that in heaven everybody would speak in rhyme. Like we'd speak rhythmically in rhyme.
That would be interesting.
That'd be something.
Okay.
Yeah, but that was based on that same premise that
Mhm.
like heaven is a musical
Yeah.
reality,
Mm-hmm.
Well, any concluding thoughts or anything you want to throw in here?
I don't know. I think we covered a lot of stuff, a lot of good
What's next
questions.
for your music? I mean, you're leaving high school
Yeah.
soon. You're graduating this
Yep.
spring.
I graduate probably May or June.
Yeah, and then you're going to Christendom.
Yes. Yep.
And are you going to get involved with the choir there, or?
Probably. I'm thinking about it, kind of considering what I want to do next. I've just been offered a paid position in one of the choirs I'm in, So I'm going to be doing that for a few months, and then I hope to coach vocal performance eventually.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe in college even. I'd like to do that. There's a music school right near Christendom
Yeah.
that I think would be good to coach at. And yeah, just learning as much as I can. Right now, I'm actually self-taught in vocal performance because I'm saving money for college, so I can't really spend it on musical stuff right now. But so yeah, that's what I want to do going forward.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
So this is going to be whatever you do with your life,
Hmm.
this is going to be a permanent part of it.
Definitely, yeah. Music and singing especially are like solid in
Yeah.
there.
I'll
Hmm.
tell you what, it's gotten me through some rough times.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
there was times where if I didn't have my guitar,
Hmm.
or if I didn't have access to music,
Hmm.
I don't know how I would have processed things,
Yeah. Hmm.
So I hope you stick with it.
Yeah,
I've heard you sing. You're very talented.
Thank you.
Yes. So, all right, Hannah. Well, thanks for chatting. It's been super interesting, and I appreciate all your insights.
Thank you for having me on here.
Yeah, we better shut it off and wake your dad up.
I know.
All right, until next time. See you guys.